Hello, everyone.
Like,
Welcome to this session, Leveraging Web Services for UI. My name is Tyson Harris, and I'm joined by a panel of guests here, but our presenter today is Synergex Director of Sales and Product Marketing, Rachel Gibson. Rachel joined Synergex in 2018 as an account manager like myself, after relocating to Sacramento from Boston, having held sales positions in the EdTech and tech spaces. Rachel quickly took on a leadership role at Synergex, first as sales manager, where she worked closely with the sales team and customers to promote Synergex products and services before being promoted to her current position. As director of sales and product marketing, Rachel continues to serve as the voice of the customer while overseeing the sales and customer service teams. Additionally, she focuses on effectively marketing Synergex solutions to customers. So we're going to start her presentation here in just a moment. But as a reminder, there's going to be some time for Q&A after the presentation with an opportunity to use your microphones, hopefully. In the meantime, you can post questions or comments that you have to the Q&A or the chat area, and we'll log those to address after the session. If you have any technical issues, you can contact classes@synergex.com, and we'll post that email in the chat as well. And also for your reference, this session is being recorded. So without further ado, let's kick off Rachel's presentation.
hello, and a big thank you for joining this session. Some of you may remember my session from last year's virtual conference, where I interviewed some of our customers at Radley and Forward Solutions. In 2020, they both began the process of updating their user interfaces of their Synergy-based application. This year, we will be following up to check on their progress. Much like last year, we will start off with Radley and move on to Forward. I'll kick each of these conversations off with a quick company overview, then a conversational Q&A, followed by a brief demonstration of their software. But before we jump into the interviews with Forward and Radley, I wanted to share some words of wisdom from these teams that were pivotal to their success. And by the way, if you want more tips on how to make sure your technical projects are successful, don't miss out on Henrico Dolphing's session next week. During and after Forward's proof of concept last year, the team spent a lot of time working together to make sure there was an established style guide, including things like color and sizing and fonts for the new screens. By making this time investment up front, the team saved time in the long run, as they did not need to go back and reskin screens after the fact. It's also a good idea to bring in someone with a good aesthetic eye into this process, which is not necessarily always the programmers on the project. This focus has paid off big time during their customer demos, as the app looks slick and not like programmer art. Another element of Forward success comes in the form of Lynn Hughes, who we'll be speaking to later in this presentation. Lynn is a subject matter expert in the application, both in how it's made and in how customers really use it. Lynn was identified from the beginning as an important resource for both user requirements and knowledge about the back end of the existing system. Forward really took the opportunity to improve certain workflows and layout, and Lynn has given feedback on what would be best from the user's point of view, as well as providing clues to locate the back-end code that needs to be modified to be called by the front end. As you can imagine, the software is being developed faster with the voice of the customer in mind. One of Radley's biggest challenges this year has been in one of their third-party frameworks. In the past, Radley used to create their own custom frameworks, but in their new UI, they're using third-party frameworks. This can be tough if the framework that you've chosen doesn't have exactly what you're used to working with. While Radley has adjusted to these standards, it wasn't without some friction. As with any third-party frameworks, it's also another variable in the equation that can go wrong or go out of support, and another thing to modify for every new screen. Radley's advice is to make sure that you understand the framework you're selecting from the beginning and take the time to review multiple options. So starting with Radley, this year we're going to be talking with Tim and Alex, who you might remember from last year, about the progress that they've made over the past year. For our first interview, we've got Tim Bunker at Radley. Tim, can you take a second to reintroduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tim Bunker. I'm the iCares development manager for Radley Corporation. iCares is a EDI product that's geared towards automotive suppliers that does release accounting and shipping. I've worked at Radley for 30 years and have been using Synergex or some form of it, Synergy, the whole time I've been here.
Thanks. And just as a refresh of the components of Harmony Core that you are taking advantage of, can you expand on the following use cases? We've got the code gen, file access, and direct data access.
Okay, the code generation, basically we use what's in regen.bat. We use the generation of IO routines from RPS and then the methods from our method catalog. Very minimal use of code gen beyond what's provided just as part of Harmony Core. As far as file access, we've divided it two ways. We've written a custom file spec resolver because all of our file paths are dynamic and can be set by the customers in individual companies within an instance of the product. So there's a custom file spec resolver that's used both in OData and in our traditional bridge calls. Our file access is actually split probably 50-50 between OData and traditional bridge calls. Any kind of simple direct listing and queries are done through OData. Anything that's a little more complex that we already had existing logic for before the migration, we do through the traditional bridge calls.
What are the big milestones that you've hit in the last year?
The biggest milestone is we deployed. We've deployed to all of our cloud customers, which is probably 50% or more of our existing customers. We've completed a big chunk of the product, although the scariest parts are left. We've accelerated the development process and included more developers. And that's something we've really needed to do, not necessarily because of the Harmony Core side, but more because of the Angular side of our development. We've done some custom solutions on premise with Harmony Core. And we've also started our second major application, our iReady application, which is more of a straight EDI translator.
Can you talk a little bit about your staged process?
Okay, our product is very large, approximately 1,700 modules. We realized we couldn't just rewrite from the ground up and get a product to our customers in a reasonable amount of time with parallel development. It just wouldn't have happened. We don't have the resources. So we've actually started a process where we embedded our Angular screens within our existing ASP-based old XFNL.com. Yes, that's what I said. And with the Harmony Core and Angular screen. So our customers are seeing individual screens coming out during our 2-week release cycle with the Angular changes in them. The end goal is, of course, a full Angular rewrite, and we've actually turned our focus to that now as we're 50% or more through the rewrite of the product. But in the meantime, our customers are getting new functionality.
What has the feedback been from users, in particular your customer support staff?
Actually, it's been very quiet. We haven't had a ton of feedback, which we take as a good sign. There has been no negatives, no yelling from the customers through support. Our customer support staff has made suggestions, mostly a look and feel, some performance that we had to deal with, some issues early on with when data is located in multiple locations, multiple servers that we had to do some corrections for, some timeouts that we had to build in to force filtering on screens. But for the most part, it's been very quiet and very, very silent, which is nice.
In your rollout to customers, you have both cloud and on-prem. How has this helped or hindered your ability to control things?
Well, that's actually been one of the very nicest parts. So during our first rollout, we rolled out to our cloud machines and one cloud machine at a time. So we were able to control if there were any issues. We built in the ability to turn on and off the Angular features and the Harmony Core features within the product. So we expanded that to all of our cloud VMs. So our whole cloud environment is now running the Angular, and that was done early on. And we have not had to roll it back at all on the cloud. On-prem is a little bit different because there are prerequisites for Angular and for Harmony Core, and we've held off until recently installing on-prem. But now on-prem, it's a choice. as they upgrade to new versions of Synergy, we'll be upgrading them to the Angular Elements screens. And we've done custom projects on-prem as well with Harmony Core, where those functions are the only Angular screens available within the product.
Now that you're 2 years into this project, how does management view this investment?
They are definitely still on board. At the beginning, it was shaky. We had to convince them, and I think I talked in the last conference about traditional bridge was the turning point that said, okay, we can do this. I think their biggest issue is the speed of the rollout, and that's not a Synergex Harmony Core thing. That's the Angular side, the rewrite of the UI. But again, they are very aware that we have to get this done and we have to move forward. So they're all on board.
What has your experience been like with components like Dev Extreme? Are you happy with how this has gone?
That's actually been our biggest struggle. Had Dev Extreme kind of, I wouldn't say forced on us, but it was implemented by one of our other branches that does data collection. And we started down that path, and I don't think knew it well enough to begin with. So it's been a bit of a struggle, our old product had 20 years. It was a custom set of libraries that had 20 years worth of development. So we spent a lot of time fighting with Dev Extreme to get those pieces back in that we've had there for all these years. So that's one of the things that we definitely would have done up front, is understand those libraries better.
How has PSG's involvement with this project evolved over the last year?
Originally, we were meeting with PSG every 2 weeks and then every month. Over the last year, basically, it's subsided down to a couple of calls over specific issues, and no real direct involvement with PSG at this point. We're pretty much on our own now.
Your future plans include starting this process with your other synergy based applications. What would you do differently, if anything, when starting these other projects?
I think I already mentioned the one is know your framework better than we did when we started. Really dive into it, do the demos, do the tutorials, and if you need to take a class, do it, because that's been our biggest struggle. The other thing that we really ran into that is both Synergex and the Angular side is customizations and dynamic screens. Is something that we have literally thousands of customizations within the product and hundreds of custom screens. And we've tried as part of the project to eliminate that from the UI side and push it to the back end. So, now as we've gotten further into this, we're trying to eliminate as much as possible of those customizations and dynamic screens, because that actually has been one of our biggest struggles, is fighting with those. Again, every customer has customizations. The other thing that we ran into, just a minor point, is spawn processes when you're running traditional bridge. That's something we need to go through and find if they're using standard output, because it causes conflicts with the traditional bridge calls. That's something, as we're moving forward, we've started the second product in iReady. We're already down probably, just probably 10% into it, but we took our lessons from iCaris and have already applied it to that product at this point.
Well, thanks, Tim, for taking the time to speak with me. And speaking of Icarus, we're going to be watching Alex Nowak of Radley do a demo of the new software. So that's coming up.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Nowak and I'm a programmer at Radley. Alongside several others on our development team, I've spent the last year or so working on a project to rewrite the ASP-based front end of our applications using the Angular framework, which has in turn included an implementation of Synergex's Harmony Core product. I've been asked to give a brief demo of what that looks like, so I'll start in our ASP-based application with a few screens that have not yet been rewritten in Angular. Welcome to iCaris, Radley's solution for automotive EDI and release accounting. One thing that we've taken advantage of from a development standpoint is the fact that the good majority of our screens in the application fit into one of two categories, what we internally have been referring to as report screens versus quote-unquote maintenance screens. A report screen, which I will show you first, is a form view where input criteria is submitted to the server in a single call, and then some type of report file is returned, hence our term report screen. Could be a PDF or a spreadsheet of data on file, or it could be a log after having generated EDI data, for example. So input criteria is passed to a traditional Synergy program on the back end. Files are open, records are processed, files are closed, and then the report is returned to the client. Our users have the option to either submit the job to run in the background via our scheduler product, and then they can review the report on their own time, or they can interactively execute the process in which the report will be opened immediately upon the process finishing. These screens are pretty straightforward, nothing in particular that I want to point out, so I'll move on to a maintenance module. These screens are essentially a means to view and maintain records within our data files, hence our term maintenance screen. So it could be an address file, could be the part file, in this case our shipper files. In an ASP version of a maintenance, we force the user to input the key fields to a particular record or select via the query button if it already exists. Once the key to a record is input or selected, we navigate to a form view of all the fields that apply. A few things that I want to quickly mention. Number one, our maintenance screens are generally very custom. So we alter which fields are displayed, what their label text reads, whether they're mandatory or read-only, and so on, according to the current conditions. So for example, what customer am I, what trading partner is the record for, what's the ERP integration, what's the EDI standard. This is all done right in the ASP using VB script server-side code. So statements like if this customer then, or in the case of this trading partner then. Next, our maintenance screens are stateful and so depend on static and global values being retained in a session on the server. So from the time I navigate to a module to the time I navigate away from that module, all server calls made to, for example, open a file, read a record in the file, update the record in the file, read the next record on file, etc., are all done on the same static channel. Lastly, I'm going to point out these buttons in the upper right, which show the children of the current record. So think of your typical items on an order example, or in this case, details on a shipment. We also have contacts for an address, requirements for a part shipped to combination. These are simply maintenances themselves. So they look, feel, and function the same way. You enter or select the key fields for a record, and then we will show you a form view of the fields. You can add or update depending, delete the record, view its children, and so on. So now I will switch over to the Angular application to show you a report screen and a maintenance over here. I will start in a maintenance, since that's where we just finished, and because it's the most different between the two applications. Immediately you'll notice it's a completely different user experience. We display a grid of all records on file. The user can use the paging widget to navigate to a particular record, use the filter row to narrow in on a particular subset of records, can use the plus button in the upper right to add a record, the trash icon within a row to delete a particular record quickly, or use the edit icon within a row or double click a row to view or edit a record. One thing I want to note here is the fact that the grid data is sourced from a Harmony Core OData call. So we query the address master file in this case directly for this data. The add or edit view of a maintenance shouldn't feel too different from the ASP version of the application from a user standpoint. The major difference being the applicable children now being displayed beneath the form in a grid versus the buttons in the upper right that I showed you a minute ago. Two major differences from a technical standpoint are, number one, our means of handling UI customization, and number two, the fact that by implementing a RESTful Harmony Core API, we must by definition be stateless. Because of how much validation and logic is built into our backend Synergy programs for maintenances, we elected for the add, update, and delete functions to be calls through Harmony Core traditional bridge to our existing traditional Synergy programs rather than those be OData calls. So with each Angular implementation of a maintenance module, there is work to be done to make the calls stateless or independent of one another with no reliance on global or static values or channels, as I mentioned is the case with our ASPs. Then in terms of UI customization, I mentioned earlier the server-side VB script code built right into the ASPs. We elected to go the route of separating client code from server code and thus managing UI customizations on the back end. So a call is made from the Angular client to the server to retrieve all applicable UI customizations, and then they're applied accordingly. So we have defaults for each field, whether visible, read-only, required, what the prompt or help message should read. And then we override the defaults by updating those field attributes according to the customizations returned from the server. But rather than go in and out of different records in a maintenance, I'm going to move on to a report screen where I can more quickly and easily show customizations being applied. So if I enter Toyota for my trading partner, for example, you'll see these couple extra fields display. And then if I change my trading partner to Honda, for example, those 2 custom fields disappear. Other than styling, the Angular versions of report screens pretty much align with what our customers are used to in their ASP equivalents. And so they can either select to submit or they can execute a report. And actually, the exact same backend traditional Synergy program gets called, just now through traditional bridge. So I think the last thing I want to show, I'm going to switch back to our ASP-based application, is how we have embedded a number of our Angular screens right into the application that our customers are used to. We do this using Angular elements. So in a moment, you will see our Angular implementation of address maintenance. This has allowed us to incrementally deploy a few modules at a time to hopefully more smoothly transition our customers to the new look and feel. At this point, all of our release reports, the majority of our common file maintenance modules, also most of our trading partner application modules have all been completed. We've started in our receive process data menu options as well as some of our shipping functions. And then we actually have one developer who has completed, I want to say, a dozen or so modules, if not a bit more than that, in one of our other products, iReady. I hope this demo was helpful or interesting at a minimum. So thank you so much for listening.
Last year, we spoke with Forward's managing director, Richard Litchfield, about the proof of concept on their new Forward Office front end. The team, which was comprised of Synergex consultants, succeeded in proving that our web services framework, Harmony Core, could handle the job. By mid-2021, work began on the first MVP. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm hoping you can take a second to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Dan Ellis. I'm a solutions architect with the professional services group here at Synergex.
Hello, and I'm Lynn Hughes from Forward Solutions in Nottingham, and I'm a compliance officer.
Thank you. We're going to start with some questions for Dan, and then we'll move on to some questions for Lynn. Dan, I'm hoping you can start out by talking about the scope of that first MVP or minimal viable product.
Yeah, sure. We wanted to get something that we could deliver by the end of the year, but we wanted to make sure that we had as much usable functionality in it that we could. So I went on site. We had a wide group of stakeholders involved in the meeting to get all different views. We had people from sales, we had the customer success managers, project managers, and senior techies at Forward. And we looked at the day in the life of a typical user. And with a lot of systems, the 80-20 rule applies. So 20% of the functionality is used 80% of the time. So we talked that over. It was a full day's meeting, and we decided that we were going to focus on something called the workflow list, which we'll talk about in a little bit later.
This project is on a much larger scale than that initial proof of concept. How did you get organized for a kickoff?
Yeah, it was tricky. The team, it was, as you mentioned, it was an integrated team with staff from Forward as well as staff from Synergex, and we spanned 8 hours of time zone as well. So myself in the UK and the Forward developers and people in the UK time zone. We had people on the East Coast of the US providing project management, and then we had Synergex developers in California, so 8 hours behind our time zone. So one of the most difficult things was to actually pick a good time for our daily stand-up. So we selected 4:15 UK time, Greenwich Mean Time, which is 8:15 in the morning in California. But it worked well. We used Azure DevOps to create all of our tasks. So, I was instantly able to look in Azure DevOps every day and see what happened while I was sleeping by the developers in California. We also created a Teams channel to communicate, although I will admit we didn't use that very often. We often fell back to using email. But on the whole, it worked well, and it is working well.
did you decide what to tackle first within the application?
Well, like I mentioned, we looked at the day in the life of a typical user, and we looked at a function called the workflow list, and it's, as you'll see later on in the demonstration, it's a list of jobs that drive what the user is going to do on that day. It tells them where exceptions are, what things need to be entered, and there's a lot of functionality that hangs off that we needed to do to be able to update jobs, to be able to copy jobs and create templates from existing jobs. So that was where we focused our effort. We also looked at a couple of other things. There's a capability to drag and drop to create a master job from sub jobs, which we thought would lend itself to a web interface, excuse me, where you can actually graphically see how you're going to be building up a load from a number of smaller jobs.
Was there a menu required at this point?
No, we talked about that at the MVP meeting, and we decided actually we didn't want to create a menu at that point. The workflow list has a number of different options on it. So we've created a context-sensitive sticky bar in the UI where we can basically put menu entries on that are applicable at that point in time. So we've led with that first. We didn't think it was required for MVP 1.
Last question for you, Dan. What comes after MVP 2?
After MVP 2, we're going to look at something called the Ops Workbench. So this is a huge behemoth in Forward Office. It's a toolkit-based program for editing jobs, which are the sort of the lifeblood of the Forward Office system. And it's really customizable. It's a Synergy Toolkit application, but it's very much data driven, where you can change the prompt, you can change the properties of fields if they're read only, mandatory, you can change the searches and all of that kind of stuff. And it goes to about 20 tabs that can be added within the existing Synergy Toolkit application. So what we've also done as part of MVP2 is we've created a proof of concept to make sure that we can take that data that's currently stored in Forward Office and we can customize web programs to work the same way. We can use the same data. So we've done a little proof of concept. It's only got 2 tabs that are where we can look at the data. We can change the prompts for a field. We can change the field's properties. Sometimes even its enumerations, whether it has a drop-down box or not. So we're confident now that we can actually replicate the function of the Ops Workbench. But because it's such a large program with so many different functions, we sort of left that as one of the last tasks that we're going to do. But we have proven out that we will be able to do it on the web.
Thank you, Dan, for that explanation of what you've been up to this last year with Forward and what's to come. I'm going to move on now to Lynn. And Lynn, I'm hoping that you can give us an overview of what it's been like to give demos of this new software to both potential customers and existing customers.
Yeah, we've been able to demonstrate the new UI project to both existing and new clients, and the feedback has been very encouraging. The comments have been received very well. Everybody's happy with what they've seen. They're happy with the user-friendliness of the system, and it hasn't lost any of its functionality, which we pride ourselves in because the current system has a great deal of functions built up over the last 30 years. And it's important that we maintain those, plus giving new options as well to the customers.
I actually think that Lynn being involved in the sales demos has been a real bonus for the project, because he's often fed back comments at the demos that we've been able to incorporate into the software in future sprints.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, sorry, that's true as well, because some of the suggestions we've had in the demos we've actually put back into the new UI, and some of these suggestions we couldn't do in the current system. So that's a big plus as well.
That's great. Eddie, have there been any surprises in the feedback that you've gotten?
Not so much surprises. I think the main surprise, I suppose, is how positive everybody's been about the new project and how keen people are to implement it as soon as possible. We're always being asked when's it going to be available, because they do like what they've seen so far.
Well, Dan, you better get busy.
And we have been able to give demos more than once to customers because they like to see the progress we've done over time, from the beginning, 6 months in, a few months later. And we have got something new to show every time, which is good as well.
What impact has this project and those demos had on sales prospects?
Yeah, the new UI project and the demos we've done has definitely been good and the positive on the sales prospects. A number of clients, as I said, have asked for further demos, which is also a positive sign because I think they've liked what they've seen in the first and second demos. I think everybody's happy with what we've done to maintain the functionality, but also adding new functions to the system, which they didn't have previously or which we couldn't demonstrate previously.
Thank you both. We're going to head now into a demo from Lynn of the new software.
We begin at the login screen. This uses current functionality with checks on a valid user ID, password, and department code. The default department code assigned to the user record will automatically come through. We can now log in. Once logged in, we come to what we call the dashboard. The dashboard consists of 3 components. The first being the menu. When logged in, the menu is hidden from view and can be recalled via the menu button or a hotkey. As you see, the menu slides in from the left and has a tree view design which contains 3 separate levels. The menu is flexible as each user or a group of users will have different menu options dependent on their position or status within the company. Secondly, we have what we call the favorites. The favorites is a list of programs that the user uses on a regular basis. This allows quick access rather than having to go through the menu to select a program. And the third component on the dashboard is the workflow. The workflow in its simplest form is a task list for the user. Each workflow list, for example, will contain a list of jobs, quotations, etc., that the user has to work on for that day or week or month, etc. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of variations of the workflow, and therefore this is a highly flexible program. The workflow is made up of a filter and a list. The filter relies on soft settings, so once set up, it is very rarely needs updating. The workflow list is all user-definable. There are probably over 1,000 fields that can be used within the workflow list, and therefore this has to be very flexible. The columns defined in the workflow are set dependent on what is being used and what it's being used for. We see in the workflow section one called collections. This is a workflow which contains a list of jobs that require a cargo collection to be arranged. We will now recall this workflow. All the data displayed on this workflow comes from the job records themselves or from associated records. A number of functions are currently available on the workflow, and more are being added as we go along. The first column on the list defaults as fixed. Other columns can also be set to fixed. The fixing of columns is very useful when the user needs to scroll across a wide list. We can also remove the fixed setting if required. Within the list, there is also further filtering available. For example, contains, does not contain, starts with, etc. So we'll test the contains. And we can also reset the filtering. The icons on top of the list represent functions available within the workflow. This list is continuously being expanded. Here, for example, we have copy job, where we can create a new job by copying an existing one. Here we have an icon for the job statistics record, where we can view the financial data of the job. Here is the icon to take the user into the cargo details, of which we currently have 3 different formats, all dependent on the job type and transport mode. And here we have what we call the quick update. This allows the user to update the data or information in the job without having to actually drill into the job itself. All the fields displayed and available in the quick update are user definable, so they will differ from workflow to workflow. On this example, I'll update the collection instructions on the job. As you see, this has just now been updated. Here we have the tag list. Whilst these icons can only update one job at a time, the tag list allows you to update more than one job at one time. For example, we have here the set value, which is very similar to the quick update. And again, all the fields are user definable. You can have the same as the quick update, or you can have extra ones as well. The set value allows you to update a number of jobs with the same data. Other options currently available on the tag list are, for example, confirm a job, confirm the shipping details, lock a job, and delete a job. All these options are controlled by security levels and user privileges, so users will have different options available dependent on their status and requirement. The task of converting our classic system with all its functionality over to using the new UI is a massive undertaking. Therefore, to allow us to roll out and implement the new UI to our clients before it is 100% completed, we have made it possible to launch the classic version of the program, where the new UI version is not currently available. The final part of this demo will look at the drag and drop, which we have incorporated into the new UI. The current system has a number of drag and drop programs, and the first one we've tackled in this project is the master build. This program allows the user to recall a master job and assign subject jobs to it by using the drag and drop functionality. On the right, we have the master job, which could be a vehicle or a container, etc. And on the left-hand side, we have the subject jobs, which represent the cargo. We can drag one or more jobs from the subject list and a drop onto the master. And we can do the reversal, take jobs off the master and assign back to the available list. As part of the drag and drop, we have built-in certain checks. For example, if the action is permissible or not. And I will test this using this job. And I'm not able to assign this job because the job is on hold and I don't have the sufficient privileges to continue. Within this program, it is also possible to have more than one master using the plus sign, and we can also drag and drop from one master to another. We can also manually assign a job if we didn't want to use the drag and drop facility as well. That is the end of the demo. Thank you for watching.
Many thanks to Radley and Forward for participating again in this year's session, and can't wait for version 3. If anybody wants a deeper dive or wants to share the story with others in their company that weren't able to attend today, we've got 2 new case studies that we're going to send out to everyone that's at this session. Who has the first question?
Here we go. I've got one here. It looks like it came in as a private message. It's for Tim. Tim, when you talk about struggling with the framework, are you referring to Angular, DevExtreme, or both?
DevExtreme for the most part. The libraries that are for simple things like field handling were not compatible with what we've done in the past. So there was a lot of working around what the standards were in DevExtreme.
Tim and I had a really interesting philosophical chat in the green room before this, because we had a lot of hand-wringing about whether to use DevExtreme as well on our projects. But we decided ultimately to use it and to start everything from scratch. And I think it has been helpful when you saw the workflow list and the drag and drop. They're all heavily using DevExtreme components. So we didn't try to fight with DevExtreme. We just went with it because we're making a completely new UI. We said, right, we won't try to make it fit how our existing code works. We'll just go with it. And we have had some frustrations as well, but on the whole, I think it's been positive. Although when I was talking with Tim earlier, I said I will go back and ask the web development team if they share the same view that I do.
From Dennis Hodgkins, it says, nice job, everyone. What UI framework is being used for Forward Solutions?
It's Angular 2. We decided to go with Angular and we use DevExtreme. So all of those components are DevExtreme components. And they have a specific toolkit for Angular.
One nice thing about DevExtreme there, you saw the very different styles between the 2 demos. That styling is very minimal changes. So when we go to our full Angular, it probably won't look anything like it does now, but the changes required are so small, we're not that concerned with it currently.
We've got one more question here in the chat from Steve. It says, for both companies and with the exception of Tim's framework concerns, if you had to start over, is there anything you would change?
I don't think so. Again, I think it took us a little longer to make some of the decisions that we had already dove into, things like going stateless versus another discussion we had in the green room before was SignalR or not. We chose not to go with the SignalR portion of Harmony Core and to convert our application to being stateless. I don't think we would have gone wrong either way, though.
Yeah, from our perspective, again, I don't think there's anything we would have done particularly different. we did have one big advantage. We had Lauren Cunningham from who we stole from IS at Synergex, and she's a very experienced web developer. So she sort of basically told us to get our styling done at the outset. I'm used to, as a desktop developer, sort of doing your functionality first and then sorting about making it look pretty later. But she was very, very firm in saying, let's get the styling done first, and then we won't have to worry about it later and we won't have to go back and change everything, because everything will inherit, I think, from the base style. So that worked out well. As I say, we had to go Signalar. The forward back end is too stateful. It was a little bit slow getting up to speed with Signalar at first, but we developed quite a lot of sort of test harnesses and things like that to enable us to be able to debug it and see why we had some issues. And now it works pretty smoothly. Myself and Gordon, who's on here, are the two sort of back end developers, and I was worried that we would slow down the web developers. We wouldn't have enough functionality for them, but it's actually the other way around now. We've actually got more stuff ready for them to consume. So no, I don't think there's anything major we would change.
Another quick question here from Steve. Some people may not know what Signalar is. Could you guys give a brief explanation of what that is?
Thanks, Steve. Signalar is a protocol, I think, from Microsoft. It's open source, though. The nice thing about and it enables you to make a stateful connection for traditional bridge in Harmony Core. And one of the nice things about it is it's actually a two-way interface. So we've had instances where there's been a big chunk of code, big chunk of monolithic code on the back end that we couldn't break up. So halfway through, we can actually call back to the web developer and get them to pop up a question on screen to say, do you want to continue, or how many of these do you want? And then pass that back down to the Signalar, pass that down the Signalar connection to the existing Synergy code to process the results. So it's enabled us to basically make very few changes on the forward office backend code, and we just make a small wrapper for our Signalar routines, and yeah, it works really well. Thank you, Gordon. So the one good thing about Signalar, which was you can't test it with Postman because it is stateful. So Steve actually developed a bunch of code templates to generate unit tests for all of the Signalar calls. So it's great that they're made from the MDU. We do put everything into the MDU, generate the code, and it also generates the unit tests for it. It also generates the JSON files for the data for the unit test. We just fill those in with the relevant data, and we've got instant unit tests. So before we publish a new version of Harmony Core / traditional bridge, we just mine and Gordon's processes. We run the unit tests and make sure that they all pass, and that takes very little effort on our part now.
All right. I don't see anything else coming in here. So I want to thank everyone for coming to this session today, and I think that is going to conclude the first week of the Synergex conference. So thank you again to everyone for coming, and please be sure to join us on Monday for week 2 of the conference. We have plenty more exciting sessions for you in the future. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.